A candle flickered beside a half-filled crystal glass, its flame bending with the faint draft that slipped through the window frame. Outside, snow tapped against the glass in slow, rhythmic whispers, like fingers asking to be let in. The kind of night where silence didn't comfort, it questioned. My husband once told me I didn't belong in his world. He said it kindly, as though he were protecting me. But kindness, when cold, can cut deeper than cruelty. That night, I decided to prove him wrong, not with anger, but with silence. The house was too large for two people who had forgotten how to talk. Every sound carried too far. My footsteps across marble, the clock's uneven tick, the hum of the heater. All of it echoed loneliness. It was a beautiful prison, though. Glass chandeliers, velvet curtains, paintings in gilded frames that I'd once chosen carefully, believing they'd bring warmth. But art doesn't survive in a home without laughter. From the study came the faint scratch of a pen, Richard's hand moving quickly over paper, signing, approving, rejecting. Always in motion, even when he sat still. The sound had become our background music. He had been promoted 2 months ago. Chief Executive Officer. I remember the morning he told me, his voice taut with pride, his hands trembling slightly. I had kissed him then, softly, without words, and he had smiled the way he used to when we were new. But that smile faded with time, replaced by a kind of polite distance. Success changed him in ways I didn't recognize. It wrapped around him like an invisible cloak, shielding him from things that once mattered. The invitation came on a Thursday. It was left on the dining table, beside the folded napkins I had ironed the night before. I found it while clearing breakfast plates, heavy cardstock, gold lettering, embossed with the company's logo, Whitmore Industries. The lettering shimmered when I tilted it toward the morning light. Annual corporate dinner, formal attire required. I held it between my fingers, feeling the smoothness of the paper, the weight of its importance. Even the ink smelled expensive. When Richard came into the room, adjusting his tie in the mirror, I asked, "This dinner, is it important?" He glanced at me through the reflection, his tone careful. "Yes, the board will be there, investors, it's strictly professional." Something in his voice faltered when he said it, as if he already anticipated my next question. "Do you want me to come?" He paused long enough for the silence to hurt, then smiled thinly. "Of course. You're my wife," but the way he said wife meant more like obligation. Later that afternoon, I stood by the window, watching the snowfall deepen over the city. The trees wore white coats, the sky a muted gray. Somewhere, church bells chimed faintly through the wind. I thought of the life I had before all of this. Before the marble floors and the dinners where everyone talked about money as if it were oxygen. I used to be an art teacher. Children's laughter had filled my classroom like sunlight. My hands smelled of turpentine and chalk. I remember the joy of small hands holding brushes, the messy wonder of color spreading across paper. It was a world of sincerity, simple, bright, and alive. When I married Richard, I told myself I wasn't giving that up, just pausing. But pauses, when stretched long enough, become silence. That evening, I walked into our bedroom where soft amber light fell on polished wood. The air smelled faintly of his cologne and winter roses from the vase I'd replaced that morning. I opened the wardrobe and ran my fingers along the line of dresses. Silk, satin, chiffon. Gifts from Richard, during years when affection was still fluent between us. I chose the one he'd once said made me look like sunlight after rain. Pale gold, simple, elegant. It had been years since I'd worn it. The fabric whispered when I lifted it from the hanger. I laid it on the bed and sat beside it, tracing the neckline. I wasn't dressing to impress them, not anymore. I wanted to remember who I was before I became the background of someone else's story. In the mirror, my reflection looked back. Older, perhaps wiser, but tired in a way that no sleep could fix. My hair had grown longer. My eyes carried the faintest shadow of someone waiting for something unnamed. I reached for my jewelry box, the one my grandmother had given me when I turned 18. Inside were memories, old pearls, a silver bracelet, a ring I never wore. And nestled among them, the brooch, oval-shaped, framed in gold, with a single amber stone at its heart. She used to wear it pinned to her Sunday coat. When she gave it to me, she said, "Keep this close, Elena. It's a reminder that your worth isn't measured by who notices you, but by who you choose to be when no one's watching." I pinned it to my dress. For the first time in years, I felt anchored. The door to Richard's study creaked softly when I opened it. He was still at his desk, shoulders squared, glasses low on his nose. Papers surrounded him like fortresses of logic. "Do you think this one is right for tomorrow?" I asked quietly, stepping into the golden spill of the lamp. He looked up briefly, then back down at his work. "Yes, it's fine. Just fine." He didn't see how my fingers trembled as I clasped them behind my back, how my voice softened not out of weakness, but restraint. "Do you remember when you gave me this?" I asked. "You said it made me look like hope." He glanced at me then, only for a second. There was a flicker, guilt, perhaps, or nostalgia. But it vanished quickly, replaced by that distant professionalism that now ruled him. "Elena," he said, almost sighing, "tomorrow is important. Please just try not to draw too much attention. It's a very corporate crowd." "I see." He didn't notice the way I smiled, the kind that hurts only when no one's watching. When he left for a meeting, I wandered the quiet house. My steps echoed softly down the hallway, past the grand piano I hadn't touched in months, past the library where dust gathered on untouched books. In the living room, the fire had burned low. I added a log, watched it catch flame. The light painted the walls in gold and orange, dancing against the framed photograph of us on our wedding day. We looked different then, unaware of what years could erode. I traced the edge of the frame. "We used to laugh," I whispered to the empty room. The crackle of the fire answered. On the coffee table lay a folder I'd been reviewing earlier, a proposal from the Whitmore Foundation, the charity I'd co-founded years ago. It had grown quietly, funding research, scholarships, and programs across the city. Few people knew my involvement. I preferred it that way. It was the one part of me that remained untouched by Richard's world. As I flipped through the papers, my eyes paused on the latest partnership approval, Whitmore Industries. His company, I smiled faintly. Fate, it seemed, had a strange sense of humor. The clock struck 9. Snow continued to fall, blanketing the city in silence. I closed the folder, took one last look at the fire, and stood. In the mirror by the door, I saw a woman both familiar and foreign. The dress shimmered softly under the light, the brooch glinting near my heart. I wasn't perfect, but I was whole in ways no one in that ballroom would understand. I whispered to my reflection. "You've survived worse than whispers." My heels clicked against the marble as I walked down the hall, each sound steady, deliberate. At the front door, I paused and looked back once more at the house, the life built on success and distance. I realized it wasn't just Richard who had forgotten how to see me. I had too. Tomorrow would be different, not because I wanted revenge or recognition, but because I was tired of pretending smallness was grace. Outside, the world glowed under a veil of snow. Somewhere far off, a church bell marked the hour. I closed my eyes for a moment, breathing in the quiet weight of winter. When I opened them again, I felt ready. The night before the dinner, I stood before that same mirror once more, smoothing the gold fabric over my shoulders. The candle beside me had burned low, its flame a tiny defiance against the dark. And for a moment, just a breath, I wondered if he would finally see me. Would he remember the woman who stood beside him before the title, before the marble floors, before the applause? My reflection lingered as I turned away, her gaze softer, steadier. The last sound of the night was the whisper of my heels crossing the marble floor. Measured, calm echoing through the house like a promise. Tomorrow, I will not disappear. The ballroom shimmered like a frozen dream. Light spilled from chandeliers that looked carved from ice, scattering gold across polished floors and mirrored walls. Music drifted, soft strings, a polite hum beneath the chatter of 100 voices dressed in wealth. Richard's hand rested loosely at the small of my back as we entered, a gesture meant to appear affectionate. But even that touch felt formal, a cue for a photograph that never came. I smiled, because that's what wives do. For a moment, I could almost forget the sting in the air, the way conversations paused just long enough for glances to flicker toward us, toward me. The curious tilt of a head, the faint curl of a lip. I'd been in rooms like this before, rooms that judged before they asked. Smile, Richard murmured under his breath, nodding toward the crowd of executives and their wives. They notice everything, do they? I asked softly, and his silence answered for him. The air smelled of champagne and ambition. Waiters floated like ghosts, balancing silver trays heavy with hors d'oeuvres I couldn't name. Laughter rang too loud, too rehearsed. Women in glittering gowns compared jewels like trophies, while men discussed mergers and forecasts with the same passion poets once reserved for love. A woman in emerald silk approached, her perfume heavy with gardenia. She clasped Richard's arm warmly. There you are. We were beginning to think the CEO had deserted his own dinner. Then she looked at me, smiled with her lips, not her eyes. And this must be Elena, I said before Richard could answer. Her smile didn't waver, but something cold flickered beneath it. How lovely. I was expecting someone from the finance department. You're not with the company then? No, I replied. I'm with him. A few nearby guests laughed lightly, not at what I'd said, but at how I said it. They weren't used to quiet women speaking without permission. Dinner was announced. Long tables glittered with crystal and silver, each place setting identical, precise, soullessly beautiful. I sat beside Richard, surrounded by strangers who spoke in numbers. The man across from me, a senior vice president if I remembered right, lifted his glass toward Richard. Congratulations again, Richard. The boards thrilled. You've turned this place around, Richard smiled modestly. It's a team effort. And your lovely wife, the man added, turning to me with that performative warmth people use when they're being watched. You must be so proud. I am, I said simply. He nodded, already looking elsewhere. Another woman leaned in, eyes sharp behind her diamonds. Elena, isn't it? What is it you do? I hesitated, sensing the trap. I could say philanthropy or art, but none of those words meant anything here. I used to teach art, I said. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. Oh, how charming. The way she said charming made it sound like irrelevant. I smiled politely. Children have an honesty that's hard to find in boardrooms. Her smile faltered. She turned back to her plate. Richard's fork paused midair. I caught the faint tightening of his jaw. He didn't like when I said things like that. As the dinner continued, laughter bloomed like artificial flowers. The conversations grew louder, fueled by wine and pride. I drifted in and out of it, a spectator to my own life. The crystal glasses clinked. A man 2 seats down, a young executive with an eager smile, leaned toward Richard. Sir, I didn't know your wife was attending. We weren't expecting. He hesitated, searching for the word that wouldn't sound insulting. Well, someone so unassuming. The table chuckled. Richard laughed too, the sound thin, uncertain. My cheeks burned, but I kept my face calm. I picked up my glass and took a slow sip of water. The room swam in reflection, the chandelier's light bending across crystal and polished steel. No one noticed the tremor in my hand. Or maybe they did, and pretended not to. At one point, Richard excused himself to greet another group. I sat alone, the empty chair beside me feeling like a spotlight. 2 women nearby began whispering, voices low but careless. Poor thing, one murmured. She looks so out of place. I heard she used to be a teacher or something. Really? I thought she was one of those charity wives. Nice, but not much else. Their laughter tinkled like breaking glass. I didn't turn my head. I just let my fingers rest lightly on the tablecloth, tracing invisible patterns into the linen. My father's voice came back to me from years ago, soft and steady. Never raise your voice in a room full of noise. Let silence embarrass them. So I smiled, quietly. The dinner stretched on. Courses came and went, art on plates that no one really tasted. The air grew warmer, heavy with perfume and performance. At one point, someone mentioned a recent merger that had saved the company. I heard the name Whitmore Foundation tossed around, followed by laughter. "Oh yes," said a man in a gray tuxedo swirling his wine. "That anonymous investor. Probably some widow trying to play God with her inheritance." More laughter. I looked down at my plate, a slow smile forming. If only they knew. When Richard returned, his face was flushed from conversation. He leaned toward me and whispered, "Everything okay?" "Perfect," I said, and meant it in ways he didn't understand. Then came the toast. A waiter tapped a glass. The room hushed. Richard rose, buttoning his jacket, his confidence radiating like light. "Thank you all for being here," he began. His voice carried easily, smooth and practiced. "It's been a year of change and growth for Whitmore Industries. We've faced challenges, but we've come out stronger, thanks to all of you." Applause. "And of course," he added, glancing at me, "to my wife, Elena, who's always supported me through it all." Polite clapping. He smiled, proud of his performance. I smiled too, though mine tasted of quiet irony. As he sat, I felt something inside me settle. Not anger, not sadness, just clarity. He saw me as an accessory to his success. They saw me as an ornament to the evening. None of them saw me. But the night wasn't over yet. Dessert arrived. Delicate pastries shaped like flowers, sugar dusted like snow. I barely touched mine. My attention was on the window beside me, where the snow outside fell steady and endless, blanketing the city in calm. Each flake caught the light differently, unique, defiant, unrepeatable. I wondered if that's how my grandmother had seen me when she gave me her brooch. I brushed my fingers against it now. Warm from my skin, solid, real. Across the table, one of the younger employees, Michael, I think, caught my gaze. He looked nervous, maybe embarrassed by what others had said earlier. After a moment, he leaned forward slightly. "I didn't realize you were that Elena Whitmore," he said quietly, "of the foundation." The air around us stilled. I tilted my head. "And what did you realize?" He swallowed. "My sister's medical research program. It's funded by your grants. You changed her life." The noise of the room dimmed. His words hung there, honest, unpolished, cutting through the performance around us. "Tell her," I said softly, "that she changed mine too." He smiled. Small but sincere. Richard looked between us, confused, a crease forming in his brow. But before he could ask, the band began to play again, the moment swallowed by the crowd. Later, as guests rose to mingle and the orchestra swelled, I excused myself. My reflection followed me through the mirrored hall, one woman multiplied 100 times. I found a small terrace beyond the ballroom, cold air biting at my bare shoulders. The city stretched below, quiet under snow. Inside, laughter and champagne. Out here, just the hum of wind and the faint ringing of church bells from somewhere far away. I closed my eyes. For the first time that night, I could breathe. When I opened them, I saw my own breath bloom in the air like smoke. Transient, beautiful, real. Behind me, the door opened. "Elena," Richard said, his voice low, wary. "Are you all right?" "Yes," I said, turning to face him. "Why?" "You disappeared," I smiled faintly. "I've been disappearing for years. You're only just noticing." He frowned, unsure whether to be defensive or concerned. "Don't start, not tonight." "I'm not starting anything," I said softly. "I'm just here." He looked at me for a long moment, but didn't reply. Maybe he saw something in me that unsettled him, something too calm to dismiss. When we went back inside, the crowd had shifted, forming clusters of laughter and gossip. I slipped into my seat again, invisible once more, but this time it didn't hurt. It felt strategic. I listened. I watched. I learned. They talked of profits, of influence, of charity, as if it were a luxury rather than duty. And every word confirmed what I already knew, that their power was borrowed, brittle and blind. By the time coffee was served, my silence had become its own kind of power. When people looked my way now, some avoided my gaze. Maybe they sensed the calm beneath it wasn't submission, it was control. Richard didn't notice. He never did, but others did, especially one man sitting near the head of the table, gray-haired, observant, the kind of man who'd built empires and seen them fall. His eyes lingered on me a second too long, as if recognizing a truth everyone else had missed. He smiled once, briefly. A knowing smile, then looked away. The evening ended with applause, empty, decorative, like the sparkle of chandeliers that would be turned off and forgotten by morning. As we prepared to leave, Richard placed a hand on my arm. "You were quiet tonight," he said. I listened. To what? To everything you didn't. He didn't respond. He only sighed, his mind already moving on to tomorrow's meetings, tomorrow's headlines. But I wasn't thinking of tomorrow. I was thinking of that young man's gratitude, of the snow falling outside, of my grandmother's brooch catching the light every time I breathed, and of how, in a room full of voices, silence had finally begun to speak. When we stepped out into the cold night, the air bit my skin, sharp and honest. The snow crunched beneath our shoes. The car waited at the curb, its lights reflecting off the glittering frost. Inside, the city slept beneath its white blanket, unaware of the quiet reckoning forming inside me. I glanced back at the Grand Hotel, its windows glowing like 1,000 eyes, and thought, tomorrow, they'll remember my face, even if they don't know why. I slipped into the car beside Richard. Neither of us spoke. The driver pulled away, the night swallowing us whole. In the reflection of the window, I saw my own eyes, not angry, not hurt, awake, and somewhere deep inside. A storm began to rise, not loud, but certain. The ballroom was built to impress and to intimidate. A canopy of chandeliers shimmered like suspended galaxies, each crystal reflecting the golden glow of wealth. Soft classical music floated through the air, polished and hollow, the kind played in places where people wear masks of civility. Richard's hand rested briefly on the small of my back as we entered. Not a gesture of affection, just guidance, a silent reminder to stay in step, not to falter. "Smile," he whispered, though his eyes never met mine. "I always do," I said. Our reflection glided across the mirrored doors before they opened to a sea of tailored suits and glittering gowns. The scent of perfume and champagne hung heavy. It was a world I had once tried to belong to, but tonight, I walked through it as if through a dream I'd long since outgrown. We were greeted by applause, not for us, but for him. The new CEO. Richard's name was on every tongue, his handshake a currency of ambition. I stood slightly behind him, watching as people congratulated him with smiles too sharp to be genuine. My presence at best was a shadow at his shoulder. "Ah, you must be Mrs. Harland," one of the director's wives said, her diamonds winking beneath the chandeliers. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "We've heard so little about you." I returned her smile gently. "That's because I don't talk about myself much." She chuckled, the sound light but dismissive. "That's probably for the best in a crowd like this." I laughed softly too, though mine carried no malice, just quiet grace. Richard didn't correct her. He didn't even glance my way. Dinner was served in a long hall lined with gold-rimmed glasses and polished silverware. Every plate gleamed under the light like something sacred. I sat beside Richard, surrounded by laughter that never touched the soul. He spoke easily with the others, about market projections, board strategies, and upcoming mergers. Words like equity and stakeholder drifted past me like a foreign language I no longer wanted to learn. "So, Elena," a man across the table asked, "what do you do to keep busy while Richard conquers the corporate world?" His tone was light, but I heard the condescension beneath. Richard chuckled, swirling his wine. "Oh, she paints or reads. Something quiet. Something quiet." A ripple of polite laughter followed. I set my glass down carefully, feeling the chill of the stem against my fingers. "I also manage a few investments," I said softly. "Small ones. You might have heard of the Willow Foundation." The table paused for a fraction of a second. Brief, but enough. "Oh, the charity for medical research?" one woman asked. "Yes," I smiled, keeping my gaze low. "That one." The conversation quickly shifted back to safer ground, but I saw the flicker of confusion in Richard's eyes. He hadn't known I still sat on that board. The evening stretched on. The orchestra swelled, glasses clinked, and people laughed too loudly at things that weren't funny. I watched him, my husband, as he thrived among them, the light catching on his cufflinks, his smile perfectly rehearsed. Once I had loved that confidence. Now, it felt like a suit of armor that no longer fit him. At one point, his mentor, Mr. Callahan, leaned across the table, raising his glass. "To Richard Harland, the man who turned this company into a future worth betting on." Applause filled the room, echoing off marble and glass. Richard bowed his head modestly, though I could see the pride in his eyes. Then someone, perhaps emboldened by too much wine, added, "And to the woman who keeps him grounded." Heads turned to me, smiles waiting, curious. It was meant to be light-hearted, but I could feel the weight of it. "Well," another man quipped, "every CEO needs someone to remind him where he came from." Laughter again. Louder this time, "Or where not to go back to," said the director's wife from before, her voice sugar-coated, a few chuckles. Richard's smile faltered just slightly, then returned. He didn't defend me. He didn't have to. Not yet. I reached for my glass, my hand steady. I smiled, a small calm curve of lips. "Don't worry," I said. I remind him often enough. A hush followed. Not of offense, but of curiosity. Something in my tone unsettled them, though they couldn't place why. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Silence can be sharper than words. The rest of the evening drifted like a waltz, graceful on the surface, aching beneath. I excused myself after dessert, stepping out to the terrace for air. The cold night wrapped around me like a shawl, stars scattered across the black velvet of the sky. Snowflakes began to fall, soft and slow, melting on my lashes. Inside, laughter still echoed, faint through the glass. I leaned against the railing, breathing in the quiet. For a moment, I thought of the first time Richard and I met. In a small art gallery where he'd stood too close to one of my paintings, squinting at the colors. "You paint the way some people breathe," he'd said. That was the man I married, curious, alive. The man inside that ballroom was a stranger in his skin. Footsteps approached behind me. "Elena," came his voice, soft but edged with impatience. "You disappeared," he said, offering me his coat. "I just needed some air." "You shouldn't be out here. People might think you're—" "What?" I turned, meeting his eyes. "Unhappy?" He exhaled, his breath visible in the cold. "This night is important. I can't afford distractions." "I see," I whispered. There was so much I wanted to say, about the silence between us, about how success had cost us something sacred. But I didn't. Instead, I looked past him, back through the glass where his colleagues stood beneath chandeliers that sparkled like false stars. "Go back inside," I said gently. "They're waiting for you." "Elena," I smiled. "I'll be right behind you." He nodded and returned, his silhouette swallowed by gold light and murmured admiration. When I stepped back in, the speeches had begun again. The chairman of the board, a silver-haired man with kind eyes, was introducing the evening's donors, those whose contributions had shaped the company's philanthropic ventures. I lingered at the back of the room, unnoticed. The chairman's voice carried over the crowd. "And of course, we must thank the Willow Foundation for their continued partnership and generous funding." Heads nodded. Applause. "The foundation's chairwoman couldn't be with us tonight," he continued, "but we're honored to have one of its founders here. Mrs. Elena Harland." Silence. A ripple passed through the crowd. Dozens of eyes turned. Even Richard froze, his expression caught between disbelief and confusion. I walked forward slowly, every step measured. My heels echoed on the marble like soft thunder. The chairman extended his hand. "It's wonderful to finally meet you in person, Mrs. Harland. Your organization's support has been invaluable." "Thank you," I said, my voice calm. It's been a privilege to see the company thrive. The applause returned, hesitant, then genuine. Some smiled. Others looked away, suddenly uncertain of the hierarchies they had built in their minds. I caught Richard's gaze across the table. He looked undone, not humiliated, but small, in a way I had never seen before. As if something inside him had cracked just a little. The night softened after that. People approached me with new warmth, new words, new curiosity. The same ones who had laughed now spoke with respect, even admiration. But it didn't matter anymore. Their approval had no weight. I had already reclaimed what I came for. Not status, but presence. Later, as the guests began to leave, I found myself standing once again before the mirrored doors. My reflection met mine, older now but whole. Behind me, Richard lingered by the piano, watching. When I turned to him, neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. He walked toward me slowly, stopping just close enough for the silence to bridge what words couldn't. "Elena," he said finally, barely audible. "I didn't know." "I know," I whispered. "You stopped asking." He looked down, then back up, something fragile flickering in his eyes. Regret, maybe. Or gratitude. Outside, the snow kept falling. Inside, the candles burned low. And as I stepped past him toward the exit, the faint sound of my heels marked the rhythm of a woman walking back into her own life. Quietly, completely, and without apology. Morning came like an apology. Gray light stretching gently across the marble floors, finding its way through half-drawn curtains. The house was silent except for the faint hum of the heating system and the whisper of falling snow outside. I sat at the kitchen table with my hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long gone cold. The night's echoes still lingered in the corners of the house, the murmurs, the laughter, the stunned silence that followed my name being spoken in that ballroom. For the first time in years, I felt the stillness of being seen. Not as someone's wife, not as a shadow in a silk dress, but as myself. Richard hadn't come to bed. I'd heard the sound of his office door closing sometime after midnight, the quiet click that always meant he was retreating into his own world of numbers, reports, and silent self-justifications. When I finally walked to his office that morning, I didn't knock. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see him sitting there, sleeves rolled up, hair tousled, staring at a half-finished glass of whiskey beside a stack of documents he wasn't really reading. He looked up when he heard me. "Elena," he said softly, as if testing whether I would stay. I stood in the doorway. "You didn't sleep?" "I couldn't," he admitted. His voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. "I kept hearing your name. The chairman. Everyone." "You seem surprised," I said. He set the glass down. I was. I didn't know. A small silence unfolded between us, the kind that doesn't demand to be filled. The kind that carries all the words that were never said. "You never asked," I replied finally. He nodded, a slow acknowledgement that hurt more than anger ever could. "You're right." I walked into the room, tracing my fingers along the edge of his desk. "Do you know why I didn't tell you?" He shook his head. "Because you stopped seeing me. Not out of cruelty, Richard, just out of habit." My voice trembled, not from rage, but from the weight of years. "You looked at me and saw comfort, stability, something soft to come home to after you conquered the world, but not someone who could stand beside you in it." He closed his eyes. "That's not fair." "No," I said gently, "but it's true." He leaned back in his chair, exhaling. "When we first met, you were different. You painted, you dreamed. You didn't care about money or recognition." "I still don't," I said. "But I care about being known." I paused, watching the snow fall through the window behind him. Each flake slow and deliberate, like time itself forgiving the world. "I never wanted to embarrass you," I added quietly. "I just wanted to remind you that I existed outside your shadow." He looked up then, eyes glassy. "You did more than remind me. You humiliated me." The words hung between us like frost. I nodded slowly. "Maybe humiliation was the only language left for you to hear." The silence that followed wasn't cruel. It was honest, and in that honesty, something fragile began to heal. He rose from his chair and walked toward me, every step unsteady, like someone learning to move again after too long sitting still. "Elena," he said, voice breaking just slightly. "I'm sorry. I wanted to stay cold, to hold on to the power I had reclaimed. But something in his eyes, weary, human, softened me, I know," I said. "And maybe that's enough for now." He stood there, inches away. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The years between us, the dinners, the silences, the polite smiles, they all seemed to dissolve into this one still point. "I never meant to make you small," he said. "I know," I whispered. "But you did." He nodded again, slowly, as though each truth had to be carried across some invisible distance. "I don't want to lose you, Elena." "You already did," I said softly, "the moment you stopped looking at me." Then I took a step back, breathing in. But maybe if we start looking again, really looking, there's still something left. Later that afternoon, I found myself in my studio, a room untouched for months. The air smelled faintly of oil paint and turpentine, familiar as a heartbeat. Light poured through the tall window, illuminating the half-finished canvas I'd abandoned years ago, a portrait of a woman standing before a snow-covered lake. I picked up a brush. For a while, I simply stood there, feeling the weight of it in my hand, how something so small could still hold so much possibility. Then, gently, I began to paint. Slow strokes, deliberate colors. The world outside fell away until all that remained was the quiet hum of creation. That evening, Richard came to find me. He leaned on the doorway, not saying anything at first, just watching. "I'd forgotten this room existed," he murmured. "So had I replied, dipping the brush into blue. He stepped closer. "It's beautiful. It's unfinished," I said. "Like us," he answered quietly. I looked at him then, really looked. The fine lines near his eyes, the exhaustion beneath the polish. For the first time, I saw not the CEO, not the husband, but the man I'd loved once. Imperfect, unsure, trying. He moved toward the window and stared at the snow outside. "I told them you didn't belong in my world," he said. "But last night I realized, it's me who doesn't belong in yours." I set the brush down, a tear slipping silently down my cheek. "Maybe we can build a new one," I whispered. In the days that followed, the house changed in quiet ways. We spoke more, not in long, dramatic confessions, but in small, sincere exchanges. Coffee shared in the morning, a walk through the garden, a hand resting gently on a shoulder when words felt too heavy. The space between us softened. Richard began visiting the Willow Foundation, learning about the work, meeting the people. I watched him listen, not with the practiced charm of a businessman, but with the humility of someone rediscovering what matters, and I painted again. Not for exhibitions, not for praise, but for peace. Each canvas became a mirror of the life returning to us, slow and real. Weeks later, an envelope arrived in the mail, the official company photo from the dinner. I placed it on the mantel without opening it. That night had already etched itself into memory. I didn't need a picture to remember. Instead, I found myself writing a letter, not to Richard, but to the woman I had been before the silence. "You did not disappear. You only dimmed so that others could shine, but the light was always yours to reclaim." I folded it carefully, slipped it into a drawer, and smiled. The following Sunday, Richard surprised me with something simple. He had set the dining room table for two. Candles, soft jazz playing in the background, the faint scent of rosemary and garlic in the air. "I made dinner," he said, sheepish. "You cooked?" I laughed. "Is the fire department aware?" He grinned, a real grin. "No alarms yet." We sat together, the candlelight catching on the glass between us. The same house, the same table. But it felt different now. Lighter. Real. "I don't expect forgiveness overnight," he said quietly. "But I'd like to earn it." "You already started," I replied. After dinner, we stepped outside. The garden was blanketed in snow, the hedges glowing faintly under the moonlight. Richard reached for my hand, tentative, almost boyish. I hesitated only a moment before taking it. We stood there in silence, breathing in the crisp air. The world felt still, suspended in that rare kind of peace that doesn't need to be announced. He turned to me, voice soft. "When they called you a nobody," I stopped him with a smile. "They were wrong," he nodded. "I know. You were the one who signed the checks." We both laughed then. Quiet, breathless laughter that belonged only to people who had found their way back from distance. That night, before sleep, I paused by the window. Snow still fell in gentle spirals, each flake catching the streetlight like a spark of forgiveness. The candle on the bedside table flickered beside a crystal glass, the same as that first night. I whispered to the reflection in the window, "Sometimes, to be seen, you must first disappear." Then I turned off the light. If this story touched you, subscribe or share where you're watching from. These stories matter.